Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well on this Thursday, October 26, 2023. We are together today to talk about crypto, to talk about BTC, to talk a little bit about the news, because there are still quite a few positions being taken, whether at the level of Gary Gensler, whether at the level of UAS legislation, but also at the level of BTC movements. We see that together right away. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training worth €400, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto, investment, analysis technique, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress, and all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. We'll start the news with Polygon, which announced to us that the contract pool, therefore, that is to say the contract which manages the pool, therefore, which is the replacement of Matic, was launched on Ethereum in mainnet directly. So it is just an announcement in which we see that it has been carried out, but they simply explain that there is nothing to do with. For the moment, we are patiently waiting for the continuation of the elements. But in any case, things are progressing greatly in Polygon too. If you don't know what it is, I invite you to watch the last video I made on Matic Polygon, where I explain to you exactly why it's interesting, why it's important. I'll link the video to you at the top right if you're interested. And we continue with the news from ASEC, in particular Geraint Gensler, who gave a speech on Wednesday. And as usual, we find ourselves in the same terms. Crypto is full of fraud, scams, bankruptcy filings, and money laundering, so it's something that is rather consistent with what he usually says. So we are still in this process where Gary Gensler is anti-crypto, clearly not anti-BTC, not anti-Ethereum, although, but in any case, it's sure anti-crypto, it's sure and certain. So he refused to attest to the fact that he was going to attack other cryptos, in any case, other crypto companies. He didn't say it, but that doesn't prevent that we know very well that it is in his head and that it is likely to happen. And all the more so since we really have a campaign which is currently anti-crypto, particularly on the part of the traceability of the financing of illegal activities. So on this, we have a proposed law which may arrive in the USA. Despite the fact that we managed to prove that this is not the case and that there is really very little financing, and in any case it is traced and it is much less than the fiat, than the classic dollar. So we are in a dilemma, quite simply anti-crypto. But we have already known that for some time, we are just looking for examples, ideas, means to be able to leverage, to be able to create a restriction of anonymity, a restriction on the use of cryptos, regardless of the means. We will continue with Gary Gensler, who did not comment on Bitcoin ETFs, in any case, on the correlation between the treatment of Bitcoin ETFs and the fact that he lost the fight against Grayscale, a legal fight, of course, in which Grayscale was able to refile a new application to convert GBTC into an ETF. And he simply said that all the requests were currently being processed by his teams and that they were being processed, period, and we stopped there. So that means in effect that we have had a general hype for a certain time, a week to be precise, or even 10 days, which is increasing in terms of the validation of ETFs, BTC, in particular those BlackRock, which are in doing a roundabout form of communication around, because we have the ticker, which is appeared, who disappeared, who reappeared. We have the speeches of the CEO of BlackRock. Finally, there you go. We have a set of vectors which tell us that in fact we have a big communications campaign which is in the process of being be prepared, which is not official. And there is no need for it to be official to pump BTC, especially when we have been waiting for this for some time. So at the macro level, today we have GDP-T3 at the US level, which will fall 4-3 in the forecast. I think we risk being a bit higher to follow. And what will be important is that next will be the consolidation on Friday of the PCE core, but in terms of news, it is rather coherent. And what we are mainly waiting for are these figures. So we are in results which are once again green when we look at Meta, when we look at IBM, when we look, yes, Boeing. Boeing took a small lake. But at the same time, it is normal with the cost of exploitation which broke down. But all in all, we are mostly in green, and it continues to grow. I think that it will continue, and we will wait for the end of the earnings to determine what the percentage of overvaluation will be. That there is, but I think that we are still in something which is very important on the rise. So why at this moment do we have the S&P 500 which is sinking? So several things already. It is that if we have an increase in the American economy and we see that it is solid, that implies that we can hold the rates longer. That means that we can or even increase rates once again. So there is no blockage, in fact, in relation to that at the level of the Fed. So good news is bad news classic that I have been talking to you about it for a long time, almost every day of the week. And there technically anyway, we are in an extension of the trend to look here for the target 618, which really corresponds to 4,100, which is a very important support zone, which was resistance and which was support in the upward acceleration that we were able to know. So it makes sense to go and retest it, and there we will see whether we are looking for an accumulation or not. And when we also really look at the RSI, the momentum, we see that the momentum keeps the same typology in which we made a retracement, and we were sunk to make a lower low, and therefore we have continuity. Bearish momentum too, so it's rather classic. Next to it we have a DXY, which is starting to rise again, break of structure being carried out, which we will wait for that. It will be a weekly closing in all cases to decide, so we will certainly discuss it on Saturday. At the level of BTC on S&P 500, very important, we see that we continue to push upwards, and it is violent. Violent to a point where we risk really going for the 10. And so there, what is the representation of BTC on the SPX? This is overall the strength, the outperformance of BTC compared to the S&P 500. At the same time, it's logical. We have BTC, which is growing, while we have S&P 500, which is sinking. As a result, we have large green candles which are appearing, and which give us a form of impetus, of resilience of BTC in relation to the decline in the American macroeconomy. For me, we are not in a total decorrelation, although it is true that for a year we have been in a form of decorrelation, because when the species was growing, we had a BTC which was in the process of recrushing, and vice versa here, we are the opposite. And this shows that, also, the endogenous elements of crypto have a much greater weight on the BTC cycle than rather the macroeconomy, which is positive in view of what could await the macroeconomy in the half-year months, who arrive. And so at that point, we will have to reconsider it, especially since it is mainly driven by BTC, therefore Bitcoin itself, in which we have a valuation of 54% of the entire market. We are aiming, I recall firstly, the 58, and then going for the 60 and the 65. This would really be an important level for the establishment of a turnover in terms of liquidity, and we are going to look at the curve a little bit. Liquidity, therefore, which is all of the main stable coins divided by Ethereum plus BTC, represent 80% of the market. This gives us a very good vision when we remove all the other cryptos from the general state of the liquidity market. And we see that we have indeed started a decline in liquidity. We have gone here from 16% to 13%. This implies that we have a relatively lower weight of stable coins. So this implies that here is a liquidity transfer that is taking place. So, transfer of liquidity from stable coins to BTC, okay. And towards BTC and Ethereum, okay. On the other hand, what is important to see is that we are not in an influx of liquidity, because even when that was the case, and when we look a little bit with BTC at the time, we see that we had these very strong accelerations in which we had made a decrease, but very quickly. In fact, during this decrease phase, we had a very strong liquidity injection phase in the market, in which we had after an overvaluation of the price, and we had in fact both which were accelerating. Here, this is not the case. We see that this is not the case. We see that we did not have any momentum at first. And generally, when you look closely, we have here this descent phase in which we have a very high liquidity injection. Strong action that takes place, and it's a little bit what we would expect to say to ourselves that we are really in a job. So liquidity tells me that we are in a preparatory phase, and which is rather classic when we are used to managing cycles where we know that we are currently in a preparation phase of the cycle. And here we are taking a little time as usual because we went to fill the CME gap here. We are in a salt reloading zone. Moreover, there are quite a few sales currently taking place, but which are really absorbed by the spot. We will go see it later. So what is also interesting to see is that psychologically, here we find ourselves in a zone of 35,000, which corresponds to the CME gap here, which was May 2022, as a reminder, Terra Luna. And I really like this image, where we had 35,000 in 2022, where we considered that it was horrible. And here we are at 35,000 in 2023. We consider that we are the kings of the earth. In 1 year, we have completely changed in terms of emotions. As always, pay close attention to positioning and the impact of emotions on your trading, on your investments. Always take as much perspective as possible. Especially since I remind you that we are currently experiencing a bullish acceleration, which is driven by a rumor and not a validation, and we do not know how the validation will play on the market, and that is why we must always be very, very careful. So we're going to continue a little bit. We're still in this big acceleration. We see that we have a very strong little consolidation. When we continue to zoom in, we see that we are really in a form of compression, in which I think we're going to come out pretty quickly. Whether it's up or down, it doesn't matter. We know that we have imbalance here. Personally, I will wait for a retest of this zone to tell me that we are indeed in a form of retracement starting again. On the rise, if we hold this support, if we break it and we integrate it below and it becomes a resistance that we cannot break good at that moment, we will have an index to short to seek the 25. Agree, do I interact here? Absolutely not there. I have no interest in working on this area, in any case in the medium term, because the risk-reward is absolutely not interesting, because precisely we is in the process of squeezing liquidity. We can see it clearly here on this heat map. We have the liquidity that is being created at the top and bottom. So at the bottom we see that we still have a large block which is at the level of 34 up to potentially 33.3, which is rather classic, in which we had this beginning of settling at the level of the upward acceleration. And so this liquidity tells me that in any case I have no interest in trying to position myself on one side or the other, because there are great possibilities of having what we call doubles. Swipes, that is to say fetching equity at the top to fetch equity at the bottom, and then making an upward movement or vice versa if it is the other movement which is decided. So for me, there is nothing to do, especially, let's add something else. At the order flow level, I don't have a decision that is in progress. I don't have any leverage that is in progress. I have a decision at the level of the funding rate, mainly in the long term, which is in the process of positioning itself. And then I have the CVD on the future stable corners, where we see that we are slightly in a downward slope. Whereas here we are rather in a trend which is in a form of compression, or even slightly too, we see that we have a small inconsistency between both. It's a warning sign for me, which is not necessarily alone to be taken as being a real indicator, but which tickles me about the fact that I still don't have any open interest which is being mounted. So that means that I have a compression of the two which takes place, because when I have an open interest which is relatively flat, that means that all in all, I have no side is taken, and so I have a status quo that is being carried out. What I like to see currently is that we still have the acceleration which is in perpetual. We had already seen that. And we see that we have here a reduction of the perpetual, so we have a form of sell-off that takes place, and we have a spot that doesn't move too much. So that means that we are absorbing the sales that take place. Here it is very important to see, are we going to maintain this absorption over perhaps the weekend, or are we going to break bearish? Why break bearish? Because I remind you that we have options which will expire on Friday morning, in which we still have more than 3 billion, 4 billion almost options. So it's huge, with a maximum price of 28,500, okay? So there we have a maximum price which is very low, and therefore obviously there are possibilities, if the makers are not hedged, of having behind a bearish crate which will be forced. Are we going to be able to absorb it, or are we going to potentially eat a wick? To liquidate this whole part, to go and do a retest here of the 30,000 or even a little lower to actually limit the damage, to then start again upwards or quite simply do a reintegration, that we still have no indication. Personally, when I am in a movement like that, I am not going to interact with it. The fact of not trading is also trading, because quite simply when we are in a phase of market uncertainty in which we are waiting for news and we are buying the rumor, personally I will not play this game. Especially since the 35,000 are a very, very important level to maintain, and to know that it will be relatively complicated to break that. On the other hand, if we break it, I can tell you that we will go relatively high. We risk going for the retest here of 39,000 agreement, in which we have an order block, which is the beginning here of Terra Luna, so the real beginning here. But we had a crate on a retest, and then it was the break here, 37,500. And we have a big order block which is in 39,000, so it is very likely to go and retest this part, especially since we have a price call at 1.618 at 36,382, which is the small order block located here, which has already been played quite a few things before really having the gap and the bearish breakout. So for me, we are in this process where we find ourselves in an important area, in which we have a rumor, so we take a step back as usual, and we secure our positions if we haven't already done so. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It always makes me very happy. And many of you voted for the different cryptos to do. And so that was INJ, which was selected for today. I also noted Ocean and ICP, which were selected, so it will be for the next videos. So I have at least 3 videos to make for you in 3 days, on which we will be able to explore new cryptos. And you tell 1330.